we're acquiring companies. We're trying to convince them nothing's going to change, which in the larger scheme of things, nothing is going to change, right? They still do the same type of work they always did. They still have the same customers they always had. But now you're trying to get them to have MFA. You got to try to get them to use website filtering. You're doing a bunch of different things to them, and you just have to balance that at a reasonable pace. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. You just can't go add 1,000 controls on day one. You add a control every day or two, and then before they know it, they don't recognize it. So that's just a funny thing that people are that concerned about what browser when they're all come from the same engine and the same source code. We're adding more and more rules to SquareX to just harden it. And there's certain things that we can do now with browser security that we couldn't do through DNS filtering. And I like that. When you look at attacks like the scatter spider, one of the things we have now is we block any domain with our name in it that's not our domain. And that's just an interesting wild card that we've been able to add that we couldn't do through the other tooling we had prior. So that gives me a little bit more comfort that no one's going to email us from irpros-helpdesk, right? Or some made up domain that looks legit.
Hi, Tom. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast.
Hi.
I'd love to introduce you to our listeners, who are about to learn more about your journey. So Tom Sweet is a CIO of Industrial Refrigeration Pros. And today we're going to speak about so many topics. Tom is a security veteran of more than 20 years. Your experience covers the gamut of financial services, mining, and now refrigeration at IR Pros. And you also believe that IT leadership needs to be technologically competent. And I'm super excited to talk about this further. So welcome to the show. I think maybe just to kick things off, let's start from the beginning. How did you get into cybersecurity? What inspired you to enter this space?
I started in my career in civil engineering, which is structural design, roads and bridges, that sort of thing. And in 1997, there was a big demand in Massachusetts, where I lived in the eastern part of the U.S., for people with computer skills. And I was able to make a transition from civil engineering, which had a lot of people and not as many jobs, to what they called high tech. Now we call it IT, but it was called high tech back then. And I made that transition. And my first role was testing laptops for NEC. And that was great. And then I moved to GTE into networking, which had a web hosting solution. And part of that was as a secure Windows NT4 web hosting solution. So that's really how I got started is back then.
Yeah, it's very interesting, there are so many changes that happen throughout your career that you never know where you're eventually going to end up. Mm-hmm. And now you're part of the executive leadership at IR Pros. Why did you leave a role co-leading Azure Cloud for a PE-backed startup?
Yeah, that's a great question. I worked for GM Financial. When I started there in 2016, I had a huge team, about 150 people. I was probably the 17th VP of IT. And then once, by the time I left, I think IT was maybe 1,300 people total. And there were about 48 different VPs. So they keep promoting, and it was getting really top heavy. And realistically, you have to look at the companies you work at and read between, read the tea leaves and say, look, if you're not increasing the staff 3 times, but you're increasing the leadership by a factor of 3, then it's going to get real top heavy fast. So that was one reason. The other reason, I was looking to continue to get to the C-level. This was a great opportunity for me, because in other interviews in the past, people said, well, you've only done product development and QA and cloud. How could you possibly do data and service desk and security? And there's always a reason that someone says you can't get a job. And I had this opportunity, and I took it, and I had 8 different CIOs or CISOs who recommended that I take the job because I got some advice when I had the offer. And I'm like, should I take it? Should I not take it? And all 8 recommended I take it. And one would say I'd be foolish not to. So that's how I took this, and it's been great. I mean, I get to really drive the ship, point it in the right direction. I'm accountable. There is no such thing as a performance improvement plan for CIO. Either you survive or they replace you. But it's been great.
Yeah. What do you think sort of encouraged this 8 CISOs that you spoke to give you this advice? What was the rationale for their thinking that, yes, that's something you should try?
Sure. So I think there was a couple of reasons. One was I'd be working with private equity, which is hard to get that particular experience, right? If you haven't had that opportunity, it's just sometimes people are looking for that particular background. So it's just a really good background. And so that opportunity to work with private equity and the opportunity to really build it from scratch. And then the other piece is the title. And you're sometimes only as good as your last title. And when you interview for roles, they always ask what your previous title was. And if you weren't CIO, it's how many levels from the CIO were you? Were you 1 level below, 2 levels below, 4 levels below? Right? So, yeah, so I am CIO. We're a 500 person company. So it's getting bigger. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And I'm really curious, what are some cultural challenges of working in a PE portfolio company, and how should one approach it differently from working in a larger organization?
Yeah, when you're working for a really large company that's established, a lot of the security policies are in place. There's not a whole lot of pushback. There is pushback, but it's a different pushback because you're in a 10,000 person company or a 20,000 person company. There's only so much pushback. And then a lot of these larger companies have different regulatory agencies they must report to. They could be a defense contractor. They have Sarbanes-Oxley requirements. Whereas when you're a smaller company and you're acquiring businesses, you have to, lead more through influence. You just can't sit there and wear a shirt that says, I am the CISO, I make the rules, right? Because you're not going to win the hearts and minds. We're trying to buy smaller companies and integrate them into one single company. And that requires, you could be very dictatorial, but it's better to lead with influence and get them to come along and be part of the journey with you. And that can be hard because a lot of these smaller companies have done it their way for 20 years. And now you have 8 of them and you're trying to get them all to change their spaghetti sauce recipe to your spaghetti sauce recipe. So everyone has the same one. And that can be challenging. And so it's not only IT changing, but everything else is changing too. The ERP system is changing. And I put that under a finance, not IT. But then their HR system's changing. Maybe their company vehicle program, their insurance, everything is changing. So in IT, you're hitting them with 500 new controls. Now, they don't necessarily see 500, but there's 500 additional controls they didn't have before. So that's a huge change. And now the day they get paid could be a different day, and that causes drama. Or maybe they have to change their doctors because it's a different insurance plan that we have, right? So those are all those different pieces. So you got to look at the totality of it and say, yes, so we have IT and security concerns, and we also have cultural concerns, and we don't want to lose staff. We don't want people to leave the company because there's just too much change for them in a short amount of time. So
it really sounds like there are so many components involved, and I'm really curious, do you think is it harder to, let's say, flip from being a CISO to PE back company and switch to larger organization, or is other way around more challenging?
No, I think this is easier. So what I did is far easier. And the reason is, yes, everything has to be built from scratch, and that this much work, but you have this much money and this much time and this much people, right? So you have to, do a risk-based approach and do what you can with what you have right now. And so you're not going to have a 1,300 person IT team. So you're going to have to say, well, with a smaller team, much, much smaller, how do I accomplish what needs to be done based on the size of our company? And you can't say, well, we have 3 salespeople, hypothetically, but I need 32 people for security. I mean, you just don't have the money to pay for that. The challenge of going from a smaller company to a much larger is larger companies have a lot more bureaucracy. My team can do something in half an hour that would take me 4 to 5 weeks at another company. I'd have to have multiple handoffs between, 4 or 5 different teams. I'd have to have multiple meetings with the change management board. Whereas now we can meet as a team, and then we can, for example, deploy single sign-on. Like if we buy an app like SquareX and we want to deploy single sign-on, we can get that deployed within 30 minutes. Whereas in a larger company, you would have to go through like multiple handoffs. A different team handles DNS, a different team handles the enterprise apps in Azure. And you have to kind of work together, and they can't do it till a week from Tuesday, but then you missed the change management meeting, so then you have to wait another week, right? So that can be really frustrating. So that's why I think it's harder to go from smaller to larger.
Yeah, I think to be fair, it seems like you're in this perfect sweet spot, because if their organization is too small, then there are like really not sufficient resources to go ahead and have necessary protection. But if you're too large, then you're just, drowning in this bureaucracy. So sort of being in the middle is what allows you to be so flexible and at the same time secure. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, to an extent, right? We started much smaller. I mean, I was the third employee. And then at the time that I started, the CEO had purchased 2 companies so far. So it was about 100 people total. And it was just me, and then I think my second day of work, someone's like, oh, you need to buy phones for this person. And I'm like, I don't even have a computer myself. Right. So, it was a lot of drinking from a fire hose at the beginning, but it's been good.
Following up, are there any stories or examples that could illustrate to our listeners how what worked at a large enterprise simply wouldn't fly in a smaller PE-driven environment?
Yeah, I think it's still, just being too aggressive with security controls. I mean, here's kind of the problem, right? And you think about it this way. And many security professionals are going to cringe when they hear this. But again, you're buying companies, and you're basically buying a business which has people. So we're not buying a product, we're buying service businesses. And so these businesses have been running the way they've run for 20 years. And so you can come down hard and tell them they can't use a computer for anything personal, and they're going to just only use the computers for work. And meanwhile, all the employees were told years ago by their previous company they can use a computer for personal use. They can use the company phone for personal use. They can even turn in their personal phone number to the company, and the company will pay for it, and they can use that for business and work, right? So you have all these pre-existing promises, and then you have to kind of work through those and balance those with the overall business goals. And so that's where putting a lot of technical controls on the computer to protect it come into play. And so with a larger company, you're typically not increasing staff by 40% when you acquire another company. So larger companies, you're bringing in 1 or 2 people here and there, and they're being told, hey, this is the way it is here. We're acquiring companies. We're trying to convince them nothing's going to change, which in the larger scheme of things, nothing is going to change, right? They still do the same type of work they always did. They still have the same customers they always had. But now you're trying to, get them to have MFA. You're going to try to get them to, use website filtering. You're doing a bunch of different things to them, and you just have to balance that at a reasonable pace. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. You just can't go add 1,000 controls on day one. You add a control every day or two, and then before they know it, they don't recognize that it's a really different system than they had when they started. So
would you say in a PE-backed company, so the cultural change is much more difficult when it comes to security versus larger organization?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely more challenging, because you're adding so many people at once. It's not like if I were to go work for some large company today, right? They have a culture that's already in place with 10,000 people. Whereas, we're 500 people, maybe only 300 are IT users. And so therefore, and the other 200 are construction. You're dealing with a much smaller group, right? And they're much more vocal. There's more disruption, right? So
it's very interesting because I would think there are so many challenges when it comes to adoption of new technologies, but at the same time, you have to, it's double complexity. You not only have to go through that cultural challenge, but you also have to adopt things fast. So what do you think are some of the key elements required, whether you're a CISO or CIO of similar size company, to approach this double complexity?
Yeah, so you have to lead with influence, but you also have to have a strong approach where necessary. And, for example, for the companies we bought, of the 8 we bought, 7 did not have multi-factor authentication. So that is just a non-negotiable thing. You must have that. And I'm sorry you don't want it, but you're going to have it, right? And there's no leading with influence through that. That's just a standard. That's the first question on any audit or any cybersecurity insurance questionnaire is, do you have multi-factor authentication? So those are the types of things. But then there are other pieces are, just trying to teach, right? Trying to, show them that these are all the companies that have been hit by ransomware. These are our vendors who've been hit by ransomware. These are the vendors who've been phished and have sent us a phishing email, or the threat actor has sent a phishing email through that vendor that's been compromised, and just trying to get that visibility out there. So they just don't think I'm some crazy person who wants to lock everything down and put us out of business. Because if you're out of business, whether you're securely out of business or out of business, you're out of business. But just making it visible that, these are these are the large companies with huge security teams that still get compromised. And this is what we're doing to protect against it, and just making that visible. And then people do get upset, but I think they understand that the interest is in protecting the company, make sure that people still get paid every week, because if we get hit by ransomware, that would affect people's ability to have a paycheck. And a lot of people depend on a paycheck every week. So.
Yeah, it looks like you have to have this combination of bad cop and good cop at the same time. A bad cop when you're like, okay, this is not negotiable, and a good cop when you try to educate more. What do you think? This is probably difficult to answer question, but what do you think is a good ratio of being bad to good cop? Like, how much should be forced and how much should be accepted?
I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I think it's trying to be a good cop, and then having a lot of programmatic controls that enforce the bad cop behind the scenes. So, we have a lot of attack surface reduction rules, a lot of in-tune remediations, a lot of things that just happen all the time programmatically every hour. So there's just ways to solve problems that way too. But yeah, getting too much bad cop is not always good. So.
Yeah, I agree. And how do you approach technology investments when you're working with PE timelines and ROI expectations?
Yeah, it's been really good here. I know that there are a lot of PE firms, and I've known people who have had to basically spend no money and just cut, right? We're trying to build something good. And I've increased the cost per endpoint by maybe a factor of 8 to 10 per endpoint, because we have much better licensing, E5 licensing, or we have additional cybersecurity tools, right? We have all the things we need. And I think you solve that by demonstrating that you're being frugal, right? We save money every way we can. We don't enter into enterprise agreements with licensing for Microsoft, because if we go month to month, as our staff fluctuates or as our needs change, we can change those licenses. Whereas if I went through a reseller, they'd want us to commit to a year to something, but we're dynamically adjusting licensing every month. We're fighting over $200 And so when you're known as someone who fights over $200, when you do spend the money, they're not questioning you because they know that you're frugal and you're not wasting money. So, and we've been secure. And so that success helps when you haven't been hit. And people say, well, we must be doing the right thing. So.
Yeah, I think when it comes to top management, it's so important to communicate. Okay, we do respect the necessity to stay secure, but at the same time, we don't go over the top when it comes to budget, because at the end of the day, all the resources are limited, and it's all about how do you find that balance between staying secure and at the same time fitting within the budget. And you have been quite vocal online about IT leadership needing to be technologically competent. Tell us more. What are the stakes here?
Yeah, this doesn't always make me friends, but sure. At one point, IT leaders were seen as very technical and no soft skills, no business skills. And then I think the pendulum shifted way to the other side, where this idea of, well, the person leading IT is a non-technical business person who knows nothing about technology, but knows empathy or knows relationships. And I think it's pivoting back, because as you see all these large companies reducing staff by tens of thousands of people, the idea of a single person as a figurehead is maybe not as realistic as it was in the past. I think you need someone with a love for the craft, because you're trying to develop an IT strategy for your organization. You must love IT. You must enjoy it, right? If it's just a job, if you don't really have that passion for what's coming and how you can deliver business value through technology, then I don't know whether that person's the right person for the job. If you can't fix someone's phone in the board of directors meeting, then you're going to lose face. They say, why? How is this person can't get my mail working on my phone, and we're trusting this person to run IT for the whole company, right? I know that the leader can't necessarily be an expert in every single domain, but I think the leader has to have a love for the craft and be able to look at a tool like SquareX or another tool and say, wow, this is really exciting. How can I apply it? What rules do we need in our company, which we don't have today? And so that's where I think this goes from. And the other piece of this is, if you're a 30,000 person company, right? The IT leader in that company is going to be leading a team of maybe 2,000 people or 3,000 people. It's a little bit different, but you can't have the next four layers saying, well, I can't be technical because I want to get to the next level, and they're not technical, so I don't have to learn anything. And I've seen that with 6 or 7 layers of management that know nothing. They're not current in their skill set anymore. It's like, how are they going to lead cloud? How are they going to lead AI if they don't understand it, if they're not hands-on keyboard sometimes? So that's my view on it. And especially it's true in cybersecurity, right? You wouldn't want to have a CFO and say, well, the person doesn't understand finance, but they understand empathy well. And what's really important for a CFO is empathy. We don't need finance skill. I mean, you wouldn't say that. I don't know why people say it in IT. I've actually seen someone say that the worst CTO to have is a technical one. You need to hire a non-technical CTO. I was like, I saw that on LinkedIn a couple months ago, and I refrained from replying. I'm trying to be polite. So.
This is very unconventional thinking, and you're right, because as I'm hosting podcast, I think one of the top qualities that I keep hearing is the empathy, but it often is brought in conversation when it comes to new hires, because when it comes to new hires, it's especially important for someone to be agile enough and be moldable enough to understand and learn new technology. But when it comes to bigger threats, I think you have to have understanding of the everything that's going on to make a final decision. So it's going to be a little bit of a scary world if we live where 6 layers of people on the top don't understand the mechanics.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the end user? They can't be as technologically competent. So how can security leaders address this lack of knowledge?
Yeah, I think it's getting worse, right? Because back in the late 90s, a lot of people bought home computers. Now, people don't have as many home computers. They have more televisions in their house. They have 5 or 6 televisions, but they don't have a home computer anymore, and they rely on the company computer because they have a nice phone, but they'll use the company computer, and so they just don't understand, right? And people just do not want to be inconvenienced at all, I've noticed. So so we always have layer upon layer of security on our devices. And so we'll take admin rights away. We do DNS filtering to filter out different categories of sites, including malware and such. We have SquareX now to help with browser detection and response. We have anti-ransomware. We have a lot of different tools in place to protect ourselves. And that, along with monthly training, phishing simulations, and regular, smaller trainings, right, will help, right? And it's kind of interesting when the users all report the IT security training as a phish. They're like, okay, well, I guess it's good they're reporting something as a phish, but we need them to take the training. So
Yeah, and I think what kind of risk do you think most users don't realize that they're taking?
they just don't understand, right? Because they're not looking at all the security websites that someone like you or I would look at, and they hear stuff happen in the news, but where you and I, we're looking at news sites every day about these 4 companies were hit this week. And they just don't understand how pervasive it is, and they sometimes don't even have MFA on their bank accounts. Like, how can you not do that, right? So yeah, it's just an interesting world, right? They use the same password for everything, right? And it's like, this is my password I've had for 20 years. I mean, I use it everywhere. And you're like, well, that's really bad, right? Because if it's been compromised, then it's probably been compromised already, and then every site's been compromised now. So they just don't understand it. So you're trying to educate them in a way that, again, doesn't seem condescending to them. Sometimes you just got to pull them aside and explain one-on-one, like, here's the situation and here's where the risk is. So
I think you're right when you said, how do we educate without sounding condescending? And I think whatever field you're in, at the end of the day, everyone is just trying to do their own job. Mm-hmm. So when you bring in your IT security expertise into play, they're like, okay, I have 1,000 other things that I need to accomplish. And then you bring another layer of complexity into my work. So how do you go about talking to users, saying, okay, do you literally pull them aside and say, hey, it's time to change your password that you've been using for 20 years?
Yeah, well, we try to, I have my team do it, but, we talk about password managers, trying to explain, hey, you know what, we have 400 different passwords. Everyone is different. And then here's how you can use this. Here's how you can use it here and protect yourself in your life. I mean, I know SquareX can display, if a user's password's been compromised. That's a little early for us to start talking to users about that, because they're going to freak out. I mean, they think that we spy on them as it is, which, I mean, we're not really spying on them. We don't sit around the pool on the weekend and start looking at what sites people went to. But everything is logged on a corporate device, right? You need to have that. You need to know about data exfiltration. You need to know about malware threats, where they came from. So everything is logged. But we're also trying to, not make people think that Big Brother's watching them. But there's other ways to kind of let them know, like, hey, you can put your email into Have I Been Pwned, and look, your fitness app you used a few years ago, you used a company email for that, and now that password has been compromised. So I mean, there's ways to do it without, being overt.
Yeah. I guess empathy does play a little bit of a role when it comes to conversations like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's shift gears a bit to your experience with MSPs. What challenges have you seen taking over from companies whose security was managed by MSPs? Any stories to share?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and I have to be careful. I'm not specifically beating up on MSPs, and it can come across that way. But in Microsoft 365, there's a feature called Secure Score. And Secure Score is a number that Microsoft rates your tenant based upon the controls you have set. And some of the worst secure scores of our acquisitions were from companies that had an MSP managing it. And so when you look, you say, here's a company that didn't have any IT support at all, and they were a 35, which is not a good score. But here's a company with a managed service provider that's managing everything allegedly, and that score is 20. And that's horrible. Like, however, you also have to look, and the managed service provider has a master services agreement with the customer, and if the customer only wants to pay for the bronze plan or the lowest plan, well, that's what's being provided, and the managed service provider still has to make money, right? A fair profit. I mean, assuming they're not just stealing money from the client, right there, but they're paid for a service, and the customer only wants to pay. It's like when you get your car washed. You can get the smaller car wash, or you can spend a lot more money and get the special wax and all that stuff, and the wheels cleaned. And many times people just get the basic wash for the car. And that's similar to these smaller companies is they don't understand the security landscape, or they didn't have the money to begin with. So they go for the smaller plan. And then the MSP's defense, they can't do everything for free, right? And it's hard to define the scope of what a managed service provider can do, right? That's why it's a master services agreement. The MSP can't be responsible for helping the accounting team write Excel formulas, or they can't be responsible for, I don't know, pick something different, assembling furniture in the office or something like that, right? So these are the types of things. So it's just that's where there's a disconnect. And I talked to one managed service provider. I'm like, how come you didn't have MFA, right? Like, why wouldn't you do that? And they said, well, the client pays us, and they didn't want it. And so I was like, okay, I got it, right? The company didn't want MFA, and they're paying the managed service provider. And so it's more common than you think.
Yeah, it looks like then in that case, for companies that did opt to go with MSP, it was more of a compliance checkbox, sort of, okay, we have something in place.
But they don't have anyone. Like, they are not an IT company. They're a construction company, so they need someone to do computers for them. And there's someone probably knocked on their door. They're like, you need computer help? We'll help you, right? So,
yeah, it makes it a bit scary, because this introduces another sort of player that needs more education around the space, and hopefully, over time, this gap is going to be covered as well. And then if a company were to shift away from MSP management, what are some pitfalls they would avoid?
Well, I think that, that's where it gets a little tricky is you have to have a good exit plan. You have to have someone technical leading the new IT team, but also be prepared that some of the computers may need to be wiped and reset. These managed service providers also will put a remote monitoring and management tool on the system. Maybe they've changed how Windows Update works. And, in the past, we've tried to really balance this, like I was talking about balance earlier, and leading with influence, not wiping computers, because, that's just too shocking for these companies. But now if you don't wipe it, sometimes you can never get that remote management off completely, or the Windows Update was so tweaked by the previous tooling that the other managed service provider used that now it's just best just wipe it, or they put some sort of EDR on the tool on the computers, and it's just best just to wipe it and start over again. And so those are the types of things that you may wind up with, because every managed service provider has their own stack. And that's another reason that we've released some, is you can't sit there and say, well, this company wants Sophos and this company wants this other tool. It's like, no, we're one company now. We need one EDR for the whole company, not 8 different EDRs, because there's 8 different companies that have contributed to this. So.
Yeah, it is quite a sticky industry. It's whatever you start with, it's great while it's working for you. But then when it comes to these massive changes, you have to really push through this a bit of resistance and to literally have a new system in place. Mm-hmm. And since you first entered the field, how has end user computing changed over the years?
Well, back when I first started, there was virus protection. Everyone was admin on the computer. It was like a joke, like when you heard someone that couldn't be admin. It's like, who's not admin? Everyone's admin. Now we have, we buy our computers from Dell. They come with autopilot enabled. They're already enrolled in our tenant. The user just puts in their email and password, and they're up and running in about half an hour with all our apps. The systems are locked down significantly, right? It's just radically different. There's a lot more management tooling to deploy apps across the country, because we're all remote. So, for the most part, all the users have no IT in their office. We do have offices, and they will send IT there, but day to day, there's no one from IT in any of these offices. So everything is remote, everything is automated. And that's just a big difference than where it used to be, where people have to image a hard drive or something, right? And make some sort of special hard drive image that could be deployed across the org. It's radically different now. So it's much easier.
Yeah, it really is so crazy the way things used to work in the past and the way they work today is so drastically different. And then even where users spend most of their time today, which is within web browsers, how do you think it's shifted the security priorities for companies?
It's harder because now there's more threats that are coming specifically only in the browser. And people just argue about what browser they use. And, most of your listeners are probably going to know that, Chrome and Edge both come from Chromium. It's really the same browser. It's not that different. You're talking about you giving someone, we ask someone, do you want an apple? They're like, I only want a Granny Smith apple. I don't want a Red Delicious or a Pink Lady apple, right? It's an apple. There's not that much difference between 2 types of apples, right? And there's really not that difference between, and so we have people who insist on Chrome, and it's like, okay. And then people who don't care. So that's just a funny thing that, people are that concerned about what browser when they're all come from the same engine and the same source code. So, yeah, I think that's, we're adding more and more rules to SquareX to just harden it. And there's certain things that we can do now with browser security that we couldn't do through DNS filtering. And I like that. When you look at attacks like the scatter spider, one of the things we have now is we block any domain with our name in it that's not our domain. And that's just a interesting wild card that we've been able to add that we couldn't do through the other tooling we had prior. So that gives me a little bit more comfort that no one's going to email us from irpros-helpdesk, right? Or some made up domain that looks legit. So.
Yeah. And I think today there are so many newer attacks being orchestrated, whether it's creating website, using legitimate domain that ends up being malicious, or for example, we just released a research on browser AI agents, where typically the way we put it is that browser AI agents are actually the next weakest link. What are your thoughts around the agents? Would you allow them within your organization?
Well, I'm trying to, I'm going to work with your team to block most of them, if not all of them, and then release them on if we have testing. But like your video shows, is trying to log into Salesforce, but is logging into a phishing site that looks like Salesforce. And these agents don't know. And, people, just don't want to be inconvenienced. They don't understand really what they're doing. And like we had one person that wanted to connect ChatGPT to our OneDrive. Like, no, you're not connecting that. You're connecting ChatGPT to our SharePoint site. No, you can't do that. So, but they don't understand. It's like, oh yeah, I can get data from here. It's like, no, but all the data would leave the company probably. So, yeah. So the whole thing, right, is browser AI agents, there's other AI tools. Is trying to understand where they are, what they're doing. There's so many different things. It's hard to keep up, honestly.
Yeah, and then the security world looks so different from where you started back then, and going back in time to the crossroads of leaving GM Financial for a smaller company at AirPros, what would you tell yourself? Like, what lessons would you use?
No, I don't know if I'd have any. I mean, I think just do it, right? I mean, because this has been a really good role for me. I'm happy. Like every day I'm happy. I mean, it doesn't mean like nothing goes wrong, but generally speaking, my stress level is less. Even though I have more responsibility, as I'm responsible for cyber here, so all these threats are on me. But generally speaking, a smaller to mid-sized company sometimes gives you more autonomy and the ability to solve problems, and that's, I've been happy with this.
So for leaders out there that want to decrease their stress level, what would you advise them?
For people who want to decrease their stress level?
Yeah, within cyber.
When I understand you can't solve every problem and work based on the amount of risk, but also understand that your company needs to make money and you have to be a solvent business, and there's a business risk. And so you have to manage that business risk with security, because you still have to make a profit. If your company doesn't make money and it's because cyber's blocking everything, then the company's going to go out of business. And you have to be able to look at how you fit in the whole scheme of things, how you deliver business value through technology. Right. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Tom, we have this little tradition on our podcast. So our previous guest would ask question to the next guest. So our previous guest asked this question to you.
Sure.
They said, what would the next iteration of an offensive security team look like, given that bots can even solve bug bounties right now?
What would the next generation, I don't know if I have an answer to this question. The next generation of an offensive tool would be, an agentic AI that scrapes LinkedIn to find every single employee and customizes attacks for each employee based on data it learns from LinkedIn, from other social media. And I think that's already started where agents are attacking. I know a CISO who received an attack, and each person had a different email and a different sender, right? And the content of each email was different, and none of the emails had links. It just had instructions on what to do. And so they weren't compromised, but it was just a very scary situation where each person got the sender was a different domain and the content was different. And so that's where I think that agentic AI is going to be used for offensive attacks.
Yeah. It's very scary. At the same time, it gives hope to security leaders that as attackers are using it to their advantage, that defenders can also leverage it to their advantage as well, because you have to match, you have to still win this battle against the adversaries.
Yeah.
What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Sure. How about ask the next guest how he or she stays up to date with technology as the world is changing?
if I could reverse this question, how would you answer it?
Me, I mean, I'm watching YouTube videos. I'm listening to podcasts. I am attending webinars. Working with open source code. So there's a number of different ways that I do it. I write for the ISC squared for some of the exams. I'm one of the exam writers, which many people are, right? It's not only me. And I stay up to date with my Azure certifications and stuff. So,
yeah, I think today is the time when it's just inevitable. You have to keep on learning if you want to stay ahead of the newer attacks that are coming out. And as technology is evolving, I think we learned so many lessons in this podcast. As you said, everyone used to be an admin in the past. Right now, it's completely different privileges. Right now, users really have to understand the new surface they're working in, and also how do you go about doing your job, but at the same time being security aware. I think so many valuable lessons, whether you're working in a smaller company, bigger company, you have to know which practice and which approach you're supposed to select. And I think there are a lot of general advice out there, but at the end of the day, you have to know how it would work within your enterprise. So I think some great advice, Tom. Thank you so much for being guest on our podcast.
Thank you.